Today I came across something in the 11th chapter of Luke that I found to be extremely profound and thought I'd make a short video about it and share it with anybody that might be interested. But reading from Luke 11:47, this is one of those passages where Jesus finds himself confronting the Pharisees and scribes, and specifically in this situation, the lawyers. And he says to them, "Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs." And the reason why I found this profound is what Jesus is saying is in the first century A.D., when this conversation took place, the Pharisees and the scribes and the lawyers, they had great reverence for people like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Moses and Ezekiel and all the prophets that had written what we now call the Old Testament. They revered them greatly. They would speak very highly of them. And what Jesus is saying to these guys is you speak very highly of them, and you may even go to their tomb where they're buried and sort of extol them and figuratively speaking, put flowers on their grave and say nice things about them would kind of be the modern way of saying it. And yet what Jesus is telling them is, Jeremiah wasn't a popular guy. He got tossed down into a pit and left to starve to death. Joseph was nearly killed and then sold into slavery. Many times the people wanted Moses dead. Isaiah was hated by everybody. Eventually he was sawn in half, history has it. And what Jesus is saying is sure, you guys, you talk nicely about these people, but ultimately, had you have been there 600 years ago when Jeremiah was around, you would have been the one killing him. And it doesn't do any good to sort of give lip service to Jeremiah and Isaiah when ultimately, if Jeremiah or Isaiah was there, you'd hate them. And the reason why we know that is the last of the Old Testament prophets, John the Baptist, they did hate him. They couldn't stand him. And John the Baptist was saying the exact same things that Jeremiah and Isaiah was saying, even though they happened to give lip service to how much they cared about these guys, but really ultimately they didn't. And what struck me as being profound is we're not much different today. I certainly don't consider preachers of the last few hundred years to be prophets or apostles in the sense that Peter and Paul and John and Jeremiah and Isaiah were. But kind of using that as a parallel, we like to quote Charles Spurgeon for one. We call him the Prince of Preachers. He was a pastor in England in the late 1800s, and we'll quote things that he said about grace. But ultimately, if Charles Spurgeon was here today, he would immediately be run out of our churches for the things that he would say to us about, for example, showing football games in church. Some of you may know that Spurgeon in the late 1880s published many articles condemning the church in his day for their use of amusement and entertainment in order to draw crowds in churches. In fact, he was actually censured by his own denomination for the things that he wrote about entertainment in church, and caused him to be very depressed. He spent the last couple of years of his life alone, pretty much. Some even say that depression is what killed him. He died essentially a outcast from his own denomination at 57 years old. We like to say nice things and quote A.W. Tozer, and yet Tozer would not be tolerated today. He would the things that he would say about our gospel evangelism, the methodology that we use, and even the dependence on different methodologies. No way we would bear the things that he would say about that. We talk about Leonard Ravenhill. If Ravenhill was here today and came to our churches, the things that he would say about our prayer life or the lack thereof would practically start a riot. The Wesley brothers, John and Charles, their commitment to literal, practical holiness, they would be beat up the way they were in the 18th century. So many times they were almost beat to death, even at times, and the things some of those great men would say about money and the wealth that we have here in this country, and yet the amount that we actually give, we're not much different than the lawyers and the scribes and the Pharisees were in the first century, talking so highly of Jeremiah and Isaiah. We sort of do the same thing. We talk very highly of Spurgeon and Tozer and Ravenhill, but the truth is, if Spurgeon and Tozer and Wesley were here today, they would not be invited to speak in our churches, and if they were, they wouldn't be invited back. Just like Leonard Ravenhill said, I've spoken a lot of places once, and anyway, I just found that to be profound and thought I would share it with you.